from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today, I'm very pleased to have with me, joining me from the US, Charles Vogl. Charles, the way, as I always say, I like to do is I keep my guests to tell us about themselves and their story for a reason, because I don't think someone can tell someone else's story better than themselves. So the floor is yours.
So you want me to introduce myself in a way that's relevant to what we're going to talk about?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, I'm best known now as the author of several books that have to do with developing leadership that helps people grow to bring people together that are important to them around shared values and purpose. And in the United States, we call that community. And I define community in my work as a group of people who share mutual concern for one another. And this is particularly relevant right now because the research shows that at least the United States, and I believe other parts of the world, we're living in a particularly lonely time where the people we know are more disconnected and isolated than, for more than a generation, and maybe more than ever before, largely because we have the technology to do that. And this is really relevant to people in leadership because in most organizations, if you want highly skilled people that need to cooperate to do well and to be resilient and to adapt to a changing world, the rate that people are connected around shared values and purpose make a profound difference. And I've noticed that the organizations that reach out to me typically have something in common, and that is they're working on very high stakes challenges, which is code for people die if they get it wrong. They're in a dynamic context, which is to say the playbook from 2019 no longer applies. And there are very skilled people that need to work together to handle the challenges they're working on. And for those organizations, my work is particularly relevant.
Great. Thanks again, Charles, for being here today. I want to start, a little bit from a place where I would say it would be like a critical moment, maybe, for many of us that happens, that let us shift our career or interests, because I know like you were in the filmmaking and then you transitioned to an author and advisor. So what motivated these transitions, and how have these past experiences shape the current work on community building and leadership that you do today?
That's a great question. It's true that there was 7 years of my life when I was a documentary filmmaker and I made independent work that aired on PBS United States. But that was just one chapter. Before that, when I was a young man, I lived and volunteered full time in a homelessness shelter in California. After that, I served in the U.S. Peace Corps in sub-Saharan Africa during the AIDS epidemic, working on human rights issues and health access. Came back to the United States. I was largely burned out and cynical just because of the challenges that I'd faced while serving in Africa. And in that time, I started making a film that would go on to be funded by PBS that told the story of a family surviving the Cambodian genocide and becoming American and creating a new life. And then I also, because I experienced worker abuse myself, started organizing restaurant workers in New York to hold businesses accountable for the abuses that were going on for restaurant workers. And those are all very disparate experiences, working on homelessness issues, working on health challenges in sub-Saharan Africa, and obviously being a filmmaker. But what the through line is in that journey, I had to learn how to bring people together around shared values and purpose to handle challenges that were bigger than I could handle. And in all of those contexts, I could not rely on transactional relationships to get things done. And that was the growth I had to learn from mentors and my own mistakes and a lot of crying to figure out how to make a difference in that. And then after those many years, I went to graduate school to study religion, philosophy, and ethics. And when I was there, I was privileged enough to study spiritual traditions that have been able to stick together for over 1,000 years. And I remember being inspired in class, thinking I could leave that classroom in that moment and find people who are still gathering in those traditions, 1,000 years later. And so thereafter, graduate school, I woke up and I had a fancy degree in religion and I had these experiences around the world, but I didn't want to do those things anymore. And I didn't know how I was going to contribute in the world for the next chapter. And at one point, I had lunch with a guy named Kevin Lynn, who had recently, just years before, founded a company called Twitch. And I remember at that lunch, Kevin told me that his organization, Twitch, had 50 million, that's 50 million members, but he was confident they would grow a lot. Turns out he was right. But what he wanted to be better at was to connect the people that were already showing up on his online platform. And for those who don't know, Twitch is the largest online platform for gamers to come together with video. And they now have 250 million members. So after our lunch together, I went home and I had all these ideas to write down for Kevin because he told me that was a challenge he was facing. And I thought, well, gee, I've been studying this for a while. People come together. And it turns out I had more to say than I thought. And it turns out it was book length. And it turns out the first publisher that saw the book wanted to publish it. And it turns out that book has done very well. And so I learned that those many years that I was doing things to make a difference really taught me skills and insight that leaders are learning today, because so much of what's called leadership development depends on transactional relationships. And transactional relationships are fantastic as long as you have enough transaction to keep people around. However, we're in a time where what used to work about bringing people together to do a good job or face the challenges or be dynamic or have resilience is largely failing. And if you think about education, military service, the state of Veterans Affairs, healthcare, the healthcare industry, there's super challenges there. And we know that part of it is the people who are participating feel more isolated and more alone than ever before. And if we are going to make a difference in those industries, in addition to others, amongst things that needs to happen is leadership who do make a difference need to understand how we can address this trend of isolation and disconnection that is putting at least these industries in crisis. And let's be straight, people die when this is done poorly.
Unfortunately, yes. And you touched on something which, based on also what you were saying at the introduction as well, about how this pandemic also forced us to be isolated somehow because of remote work, and even some people, they lost their jobs. They were feeling alone now. But I think, and maybe you would agree with me also, Charles, this problem didn't just start with COVID. Maybe because we started to shift more into a digital world, and where everyone is stuck just behind their screens. So we started to see, this gap. And what I want to hear from you, or I'm interested to learn, you mentioned a couple of these challenges, but do you see some common traits that come across all? You mentioned Twitch, as one example, but I know you have worked also with other some tech giants like Google, LinkedIn, and so on and so on. So have you seen, a common trend that happens usually, that cause this issue? And or is it something that is unique for every organization over there? And how do you usually um, tackle, I would say, these challenges, or you advise the companies you work with to tackle these challenges? Because when we are into a traditional setup, I think maybe there are some best practices and so on, and you can apply. But when you are in a kind of a fragmented digital world, things are different. I know it's a little bit loaded question, but I'm very much interested to know, like, is it like first only COVID was the cause? Is it unique across all the tech giants, and how we can, or you as Charles working with your
Mhm.
clients, try to solve out this issue?
All right, so you've asked me a lot of stuff there. So let me just make 3 points then to speak to
Sure.
your inquiries. The first point I'll speak to is this a new phenomenon that started in 2020 with COVID? The answer is absolutely not. So Robert Putnam out of Harvard wrote a book in the 1990s called Bowling Alone. That was a warning. The book was meant as a warning to America about the dissolution of our social fabric. And the title Bowling Alone referred to this idea that we're so lonely, we're so disconnected, we're even bowling alone. That was the 1990s. Before the pandemic, the United States' current Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, wrote a front page article in Harvard Business Review, which is not exactly a social commentary, belly button gazing kind of periodical. It's for business leaders. He wrote a front page article for Harvard Business Review, warning the business leadership of our economy that the crisis of loneliness was so grave that it needed attention right away. And he subsequently wrote an entire book called Together about the loneliness crisis and the need for us all, including the US government, to address it. And then the pandemic hit. And we saw radical changes in how we connected, which we all understand, why. And then, so it didn't start with the pandemic, but it certainly was exacerbated. And just to give you a sense of scale, I don't know about world research, but I do know about the United States. In the United States, the most recent research shows that half of Americans have 3 friends or less. Or said differently, half Americans do not have 4 friends. And fully 15% of Americans, or 1 in 6 American men, 13% of all Americans, say they have no friends. Well, so that's the first point I'm going to make. It's a crisis. It's almost unbelievable, and it's been a trend that's been building since certainly in the 90s. I could go on for a long time about the forces that have gone on to make us more isolated. I don't know how important that is, but this didn't happen in a vacuum. So, which brings me to my second point. Is it an organizational problem? Well, I don't think it's any given any organization. Obviously, there are some organizations that are doing better and worse jobs of connecting people important to them, be they inside or outside the organization. But everybody who's listening to this podcast is hiring people and collaborating with people who are operating in this unprecedented disconnection and lonely time. And that's why even the Harvard Business Review thinks this is a front page topic to talk about. So any organization that understands they need to adapt and they need to have teams that can trust each other need to, at some way, get better at connecting the people important to them, because we can't trust the greater culture is going to teach our team members how to do that. Which brings me to my third point. We could become really desperate and be filled with despair that there's this powerful trend. But we can also acknowledge that people are coming together for far more than 1,000 years. And the principles, the ideas, the vision we need to have to make a difference with the people we already know or around us can be learned. And unfortunately, most people everywhere I go are very, very poor at it, bringing people together in powerful ways. And they often do many things that sabotage their own efforts. I'll give you an example. One of the ideas that I write about is this idea I coined, the campfire principle. It's my latest book. And we just refer to this idea that the context that we need to create the friendships that are really meaningful for us and that we can call when we have the worst days are not the friendships we build in giant rooms with something loud going on, with a great distraction. They're the kind of friendships we build sitting around a campfire. But we don't need to build campfires everywhere. Just this idea that we, those who want to bring people together, need to create intimate experiences similar to a campfire, in that they're small spaces where a meaningful conversation, a possibly vulnerable conversation, can happen. And I'm often invited to events, very often hosted by companies, where they spend tens or sometimes 6 digits creating an event, and they confuse entertaining people with giving them a context where they can connect. And I was just at a very, very large dinner last month with over 120 people. And someone got up to do a welcome and do a toast. And nobody bothered to turn down the music so that we could hear that person well. Well, we had 100 people standing around to join dinner, and nobody created a context where we could even hear the person welcoming us. Just an example how they're just doing it wrong. They're not even thinking, what is the context we need for these people to have a comfortable experience and feel welcome? And I could go on this, but the point I want to make is we can learn skills, and they're very, very old, and they're time tested. And that's why I write them down and talk about them.
That resonated a lot, Charles, with something even I noticed. And I'm not an expert by any mean, but I like to notice things and ask people sometimes for their feedback. And exactly the thing you just mentioned now about companies when they do these, for example, annual gatherings, or maybe twice a year, some of them they do it. And I asked some people, okay, like, how was it? You know, what was the feedback? What did you do? Any team building activity? No, we just had some food, some drinks. You know, they gave us some trainings, and then we're back. So it, as I lived it, by the way, as well. You know, when I was, yeah. So now this is something which I believe it's underrated, and you know, if we take a company that does this well, how do you think, you know, they can thrive both on the business level, on innovation level, on maybe disruption level, when they go and do the community building in the right way? Like, if we need, now we talked about the challenges, we talked about, you know, the problems, but let's see if we apply things in the right way, what could be waiting us on the other side.
So there's a couple of ways to approach this. First, let's approach it in the most intimate. If you have a child that is injured and you go in an emergency room in the middle of the night, and that team doesn't know you or your child's name, my guess is you want that team to know each other, certainly know each other's names, have built some kind of trust to handle all of the challenges that come up in the first 10 minutes when a hurt child, you know, enters their workspace. And it would probably horrify you if you found out that there had been no time spent, no skilled way to bring them together to build that trust before your family's life depended on their cooperation. Now, that's a pretty acute example, but that's what's going on when people deal with aircraft, you know, factory design. Lives are at stake because of that cooperation. The other level we can look at it is the research. Marissa King, who was at the Yale School of Management and recently moved to Wharton School, she wrote a fantastic book called Social Chemistry, where she laid out the research that showed if there is a magic bullet for engagement and absenteeism and retention and reducing mistakes, it's having a friend at work. And when you have a bunch of people with friends at work, we call that a community. And it's not rocket science. If you have friends at work, then you want to go to work. If you have friends at work, you're probably not looking for another job where your friends aren't. And more importantly, when you have friends at work and you have a question that could lead to a legal liability or someone getting hurt, but you don't want to look bad because someone thinks you should know something. If you have a friend at work, you can call and ask a question. When someone asks a question that saves disaster from happening, they very rarely write it down and say, well, thank goodness I had this friend at work because they kept me from burning down the building. But that's exactly what happens. And the fancy way we talk about it is we say, when teams are more connected, they have an informal communication network that is effective when the formal communication network fails. And hopefully anybody who's ever worked in a team or large organizations understands how critically important that there is a comfort, trust, and respect in dynamic situations where there are high at stakes.
you brought something which actually it was my next question, and thank you for ending this with that one, trust, right, Charles? I think everyone who worked at some stage in a company, they heard or they lived, the stories about trust. And now, I follow a lot of even forums where employees they go and talk about what's happening inside their companies,
Mhm.
and the common thing I see is I feel the trust issues start between the leadership and the
Mhm.
rest of the company. And then we expect these teams, which are now probably they are not physically together in the same office,
Mhm.
they are distributed. Maybe they are, some of them, they are working in a hybrid model and they are sitting at home. So, how can we build the trust if it doesn't start from the top? Like, is it something possible to have? I know, like, it's a naive question, but
Mhm.
I want to trigger you to tell us, like, about how do you think this trust thing uh, is
Yeah.
important to build, the community that we are talking about.
So let's be honest. My understanding is when we look at the impact of leadership in organizations, the character of the top of the leadership pyramid profoundly affects the character of every organization. And while some people wish it were different, if the people at the top are jerks and they just want to extract and abuse, then that characterizes the whole organization. And I just want to acknowledge that because it's not, we can't just simply talk to people in the middle of the organization or the bottom and say, well, it's up to you to make this organization better. And I'm certain there are people listening, to your podcast who are at the top of organizations. And, what you can understand is there's a profound responsibility there and profound influence. With that said, there are always things that we can do amongst our peers and the people around us to let them be more connected. And when I go into an organization and they want to be trained, the first idea I teach is what I call the distinction invitation. Uh, if there are no invitations happening, let us not be surprised that people aren't coming together and forming the relationships that matter. And in my work, I define an invitation as a request to spend time where the person invited knows that someone cares if they show up. We have a name for the kind of request to spend time where no one knows if anyone cares if they show up. And in my work, we call that an announcement. And I can't tell you how many organizations I've gone to, and I've simply taught this opening distinction. And I watch people's face go white because they then realize that everything they declare an invitation is really an announcement. And then they're no longer surprised that people don't show up or people don't care. Now, there may be a bunch of boundaries in who can invite who. It's inappropriate for me to invite a bunch of wives of other men that I don't know to dinner. Fair enough. There may be really good reasons for that. But there are people that I can invite to spend time together. And what I say is, if we're just starting at the beginning, inviting others to do anything you like to do counts. If you eat meals, certainly sharing meals counts. If you walk around a park, walking around a park counts. I know somebody that when I taught them this distinction, they realized that every day at 3:30 they were walking in their neighborhood with their dogs. And they realized that they had never invited any of their neighbors to walk in the neighborhood with their dogs. So she started inviting neighbors to walk her dogs at 3:30. Well, none of them accept the invitation because they have lives, they have kids, and they have jobs. But invitations are so powerful that even if someone doesn't accept the invitation, maybe because they have a job, doesn't mean that they don't want the invitation. It doesn't mean that it's not making a difference and letting others know that someone thinks they belong and that they're connected. And what I love about the example is she was already walking her dogs and she likes to walk her dogs and she'd love neighbors to join her to walk her dogs. And if they don't, she's still going to walk her dogs. And we all know exactly what it costs to invite neighbors to walk a dog. And she can do that as many times in the year as she wants. And even if nobody ever accepts, every time her neighbors see her, they know, well, that's the neighbor that invites me to walk her dogs. right? And we don't know at what point someone's going to accept. A very simple example. Obviously, that's not in an organization, but the principle stands. There are these very simple things. And I don't know if we have time to talk about it here, but I've now
Yeah, well,
advised
sure.
several organizations. And I know somebody who started inviting people at work to play ping pong because there was a ping pong table at work. It's not rocket science. And very few accept it. But she told me how, because she had started those conversations, just inviting them to ping pong, how it transformed her relationship and the perception of familiarity she had with those coworkers. And none of it had anything to do with ping pong. Right. And now we could talk literally for days about principles of community and bringing people together in powerful ways. But what I really want to leave people at the beginning is it doesn't have to be complicated. The first question we ask is, who's getting invited to what? And if the answer is nobody's getting invited to anything, or we're inviting some people to things that are what we call arena events and not campfire events, then let us not be surprised that we're not seeing that connection happening. And part of the challenge that many organizations don't want to hear is it takes time. And so if you want your teams to be connected, then it's going to take time. It's going to physically take them time to spend that time doing it. And if the organization doesn't value that, then they never schedule the time. They never make the time. And remember how I said people are doing it wrong? I can't tell you how many times I've heard, well, we do a happy hour on Friday nights. We have everybody go to a bar. Well, Mehmet, when you go to a bar, there's probably several TV screens with commercials on it where people were literally collectively paid millions of dollars to grab our attention. Does that sound like a good venue to take people that you want to connect with?
Absolutely.
And then a lot of people have families. And the last thing you want to do is stand in a loud bar around televisions on a Friday night to try to make friends. They're doing it wrong. Whereas, quite frankly, simply walking around a park would be far better than asking parents on a Friday night to stand in a loud bar around sports games and try to make friends. So I hope this is helpful. It's the kind of thing we can touch on at the very beginning without getting too deep.
Absolutely makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. And now, because as I was telling you before we start our discussion, so I like also to focus not only on the tech folks, I like to focus also on startups. And I'm curious to know, Charles, and this is maybe would be an advice, also if someone is just starting or she's just starting her company. When they are a small team, and I repeated this question maybe I don't know how many times with many of my guests. When they are a small team, I think this is by default because they are like still maybe 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 people. So they are spontaneously into a circle, right? And then at some stage things start to break up. Many of my guests each they had their own views on why this happens, and it's not why I'm asking why it happens. This is a human nature. We know, like, the more we have people, we start to have politics and so on. But when they have as the leader of the organization, as the founder, and of course they will have in the culture like we are a family company, everything family comes first and so on, all these things. But at what stage there should be kind of a barometer, if I can say it this way, that once things start to go beyond something, oh hey, we need to bring this circle back before it becomes something that we cannot control. So from your experience, when actually founders they need to start to think about this concept before it becomes too late.
So I'm a little bit confused about the specific moment of challenge that you want to address. What I'll speak to is I think any founder needs to think about who are the people important to me and how am I investing to make sure that they have contexts where they can build relationships of trust with the people that I'm asking them to work with, which includes me. And if there is no investment on that, then let us not be surprised that those relationships don't form or relationships that formed eroded. And, used an interesting term, and that is families. In the beginning, it's like a family. And it may have felt like a family, but one of the things that made those relationships feel like a family is probably this idea that the relationships, or at least perceived to be beyond transaction, that the trust, the commitment, the welfare of each other went beyond a strict calculation day to day. And then at some point, that perception was lost, that there was simply a transaction going on. And then that's when that feeling of family left. And the sad truth is, in the economy that we've built, many managers are judged and rewarded by how much they can transact out of other people. And the more they can get out of that transaction, the more they're called good leaders. Well, that's a fantastic recipe for burning out the people who don't just want to have relationships with leaders that want to get as much from them as possible. And then they're going to leave and go somewhere else. And when I talk to people who have gone into healthcare, very few of them went into healthcare because they did a spreadsheet and thought that was the best place to spend lots of hours with sick people in a broken system to make lots of money. They usually went into healthcare because they wanted to make a difference, and they had their own experience of the pain of either being sick themselves or having family members sick. And then to manage them, to put them in context where it is simply transaction and extraction, leads to, burnout and disengagement, which is exactly what's going on in at least the American healthcare system. And so when you say, when do you pay attention to this? Well, I think the first day you better consider, how are the people important to you treated such that they understand there's something beyond strict extraction and transaction going on, and then continue to invest in that. And I'm sorry that it is fundamentally against many of the standards of good so-called leadership and management in company leadership, because it leads to ends that most of us don't want to participate in.
Yeah. Again, you're touching on things that either I personally lived or I heard someone else lived it. So, and I like your way, Charles, like being straight to the point. Now, you mentioned leadership a couple of times, and we talked about leadership a couple of times. And I know you have your book, Storytelling for Leadership. So what I'm interested to know is, how is the power of storytelling can help actually, these leaders to leverage, that skill, let's call it, to build the brand and the community and even take, the business to a much better place.
All right. It's hard for me to respond to that question when you say take the business to a much better place, because some people may interpret that as making more sales and having a better margin.
No. Let's keep it in this.
And that's a perfectly good measurable, but that's, a very particular way of describing taking the business to a better place. When I wrote that book, I wrote that because as I was advising people in leadership roles, what I learned was many of them wanted to communicate what brought them to their field and made them someone worth paying attention to and even joining, say, an entrepreneurial endeavor. And they didn't have the skills to share that in a way where that experience, their personal journey, landed emotionally in an emotional resonant way. And so it's only one part of leadership, but my guess is, Mehmet, if you think of the people you deeply admire of the last 100 years that did something that you could describe as leadership, amongst the things that you know about them right this minute about what they did was what changed them, or said differently, what formed them in their experience that made them ready to live the life that you now admire years later. Am I right about that?
100%.
100%. Well, that means that somebody somewhere was good at sharing that story so that when you learned it, you would be inspired. And hopefully they were honest about it, right? It wasn't a construction of fiction. Nonetheless, it had to be crafted. And, part of that crafting is recognizing what is worth telling. And, when I see bad storytelling leadership being taught, I hear people say things to the effect of, you got to be vulnerable, tell your vulnerable parts, your vulnerable selves. People want to hear vulnerability. There is truth. Very often people want to hear vulnerability, but they just don't want to hear vulnerability for vulnerability's sake. It sounds like whining. And if people aren't ready to hear parts of your lives that are vulnerable, then it's also off-putting, which is to say there needs to be some skill in understanding what's relevant to share that might be vulnerable at some level, that the person that's hearing it recognizes that I'm someone who shares that value, and my journey in life so far has prepared me to be someone worth paying attention to and even collaborating with. So that's how that's important in making company better, because when people show up, they're following somebody, they're doing something, and either they're just doing it because there's a strict transaction they can't wait to do as minimum as possible and get out of there, or they're really committed to make a difference. And if you remember when we started this conversation, I mentioned the industries that approach me are healthcare, military service, and education. Those are fields where people better show up committed. And they better not be looking out the door, waiting to run out the door as soon as the clock ticks, because someone's going to be sick. There's some kids are going to need help. And the military lives are at stake every freaking day. So, I think good storytelling is critically important.
I love the part when you said, like, as long as it's not like made up and it's not like just for the sake of winning.
Yeah.
Let
Let me say here, when I have heard it said, if you don't have a good story, good formation story, make one up. And all that tells me as a former filmmaker is that tells me that person doesn't know how to tell a story. Because anything, Mehmet, that was important enough that it changed your life, enough that you're doing what you're doing now, speaking to me, creating media, sharing with people literally in several time zones to help them form in leadership. Whatever you experience that inspired you to make this commitment and then put in the time to get good, if that's not interesting, then that just tells us we can't tell a good story. We shouldn't have to say an iota of fiction. And it just shows that we're bad at our jobs.
100%. And the second thing about, how much you expose the vulnerability, I believe it's very much tricky here. It's not easy. And I'm talking here from personal experience. Like, the audience knows sometimes I share, my personal experience here, because you're right. Some people sometimes will think you are doing this to make agitation, I would say. But the matter of fact, no, it's not always like for doing agitation. And you need to be very, I think it's not a skill by itself, right? Even if you are doing it, whether in a storytelling format or you're doing it just as a, non-storytelling format, whatever that's called. So, but there's a like very thin line in the difference between, making it for just showing you are vulnerable versus you are trying to convey a message. I lived this myself, and I was lucky enough that, when I showed my vulnerability because I need to make a cause, not because I was complaining about something. So I 100% agree with you on this, Charles. Now, one of the things that you mentioned, and I see it in when preparing to the episode today, about like using spiritual traditions. I'm pretty much very, like, I would say, curious to know what are like these traditions and ancient traditions that you talk about, and how they can be relevant in the modern era.
So I've traveled to several continents now to formally and then to some level informally study spiritual traditions that have been around for a long time, meeting with leaders of these faith traditions and visiting sacred sites. And I've learned enough about religious traditions and rituals that now when I travel, I can recognize similarities, through lines we'll call, about how people come together in the spaces they create and what have you. But I'll give you an example about, how this influences. I was talking with a gentleman who has a company that helps American veterans who've been at war um, create new lives after military service. And unfortunately, as is the case with people who go to war, there's a lot of hurt there, both physical and then mental. And then very often if you spent your entire adult life at war, there may be missing skills on how to create a civilian life, certainly in the beginning of civilian life. And he told me how they had found some success taking the guys out at night, and they took them around a fire, and they did some stuff out there, and it was just the veterans, and the veterans were leading it, and it was really successful. He started telling me the program, and I said to him, "This all sounds fantastic, and I absolutely believe that you're finding this is really powerful for our participants and healings going on there. Do you have a general sense of how long men have been gathering, going out in the dark, standing around a fire, and telling stories and supporting each other to heal after a great deal of pain?" And he stopped in that conversation and realized that he had almost accidentally recreated things men, and specifically warriors, have been doing for more thousands of years than we'll know. And he had never recognized that he had refound the importance of this kind of gathering. And I have names for these kind of things, right? I think that there were rites of passage going on there and rituals of bonding that we could start naming and whatnot. But what I'm getting at is he didn't need to invent anything new. And in fact, the more he would understand how people have been coming together and healing, the more he would understand there were traditions to dip into to create the impact and the healing he wanted with the men, and they are men, that he was working with. So when you say, how does this influence it? Well, I don't think we have to invent anything. I think quite the opposite. I think that we have distracted ourselves thinking we need to invent new things and use new technology and look at new research, and look at where it's gotten us. Certainly in the United States, we are more divided than we are in more than a generation. Our wealth disparity is flying apart faster than it ever has in the last 3 generations. Our healthcare system is collapsing. And we're more lonely than research has ever shown we've been lonely. We don't need to invent new ways to do this. We need to remember what has brought people together and made them strong for literally thousands of years, and revisit that. And it's not rocket science. That's why I write it down.
I will be a little bit controversial here. Do you blame Charles' technology for this?
I don't blame technology. I blame our dependence to use technology to get us results that we can only get in the most simple and ancient of ways. And now the research is coming out. The most research shows a finding that we don't connect very well over video conferences. My understanding is it takes 5 times the amount of time to develop a relationship digitally mediated than it does just sitting in a room together. 5 times. And the irony is you don't want to spend as much time with me on a video call like you are tonight as you would if we just sat down with pizza. You might sit with me for pizza from 6 o'clock to 9 o'clock and think nothing of it. You might look down and discover it's 10:30 and don't know where the time went. But if I got you on a video call, you wouldn't sit on a video call with me for 2.5 hours. Right. And yet it takes 5 times. Well, if we, at one point, it's public, I was advising Google, and Google's a global company. When you worry about how 100,000 people are connecting, and you realize, because you see the research, it takes 5 times the amount of time to do that in video, you should start getting worried. Unless you have times and places where those people that need to be connected sit down together. And quite frankly, that's one of the things I was advising Google on, is how and in what formats we would bring people together to have those conversations, so that it wasn't just a catering bill, but in fact, it was an experience that created relationships. And, fortunately, a colleague of mine was able to release a white paper on that, and it's on my website for free download. And the results are participants said that they started considering the others in the program their work family. They started using the word family when we just created the right context for them to connect.
Looks like uh, a lot of work to be done, Charles. And I think this whole concept need to be spread more and more, especially in the age you are living in. And again, like I'm 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 positive by nature. I like to be optimistic, but I believe, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I think we have hard work to do to close this gap and get people to talk again together. And to your point, like you were mentioning the US. Of course, I don't have statistics about any other place in the world, but I don't think it's much difference from the way people interact with each others. I have it, because the reason I asked you about technology, I didn't meet the technology in the sense of the scientific point of view
Mm.
of it, like, or the medium of something we use today. For me, like, it's us that we leverage technologies to create these um, concepts that made us divided first, and then like it made the world appears to the people who are like not very knowledgeable, I would say, and I cannot blame them. Oh, like, see this guy, he's doing this, and I'm talking here about the social media, very frankly, right? So I think social media, and I'm not saying all of it is bad, but what it did, it caused largely this. And to your point about when we sit together on a pizza and we look at the watch and you say, oh, look, like 3 hours, 4 hours passed. If we can do it without having our phones, that would be fantastic. But I was reading something else that I think yesterday night about how people now they go to restaurants even as families, and they spend all the time on
Yeah.
their screens, right? So
Well, let me tell you,
yeah.
Mehmet, in my home, we have a device. It's called the phone basket.
Mhm.
And when my friends come for dinner at my home, at the beginning of the meal, the phone basket comes out, and my wife and I are the first to put our cell phones in. And we invite everyone in the room to put their cell phone in as a ritual. And I say out loud that we are doing this to be with the people in the room instead of the people outside the room. And then once everybody's put their phone in, we ritually walk that basket into another room where it can't be seen. And then we get to sit down for several hours and share a meal, as people have for thousands of years, and not once check the weather, check the news, or get a message from somebody outside their room. And I'll tell you, I have a friend who created a unicorn startup tech company, and he came over dinner with his wife one time, and I was surprised to find out it was his birthday, and it was just the four of us, my wife and me and his wife and him, and we knew each other. And so I asked him, his name is Manu. I said, you choose. Do you want to use the phone basket today? And he said yes. And we put our phones away in another room, and it really meant something that this person who had created a unicorn company and was just spending his dinner with us in our home, he wanted a space where we would all put our phones and just share a meal together. It doesn't matter how rich or powerful or famous you are. There's something magical about sitting around a table and knowing that everybody there is there to be with the people at the table. And everybody who's listening to us right now has the power to create that over and over and over again.
Absolutely, and I know it's hard at the beginning. Um, I developed this habit of not checking my phone for the first, I will not exaggerate, just 1 hour, But of course, but it started with the first 5 minutes, and then the 10 minutes, and then the 15 minutes. And I start to keep building on top of that until I convince myself I don't need to see my screen, at least for the you know, first hour of the day, because it's a lot of distraction that happens, and, your brain start to work, And the other thing I like, Charles, is like we have a lot of things in front of us, which, sometimes we call it, we have to go back to basics. Yeah. So the basics are actually available to us every single day, whether it's the table in our homes that we can sit and we have a conversation, whether, I don't know, going out to the nature and have a walk. We have plenty of options actually, and not all of them. And I know like it's looked like a bit funny or ridiculous because it's a CTO show, but yeah, because I believe at the end of the day, technology should be leveraged, used for the sake of better health,
Mhm.
both mentally and physically for humans, not the opposite. And because from the statistics you started with, that we are living in a lonely world today, where everyone is just maybe they have, as you said, maximum 3 friends, which is back in the day they say like you are the median of the 5 people so even if you don't know 5, only 3, so you still have missing parts. So you are
Mm.
completing probably this from the junk you see on the social media or whatever, where you spend your time. um Charles, like as final, and I like to call it from your side, word of wisdoms for the next generation, right? The next generation of leaders, founders. If you want to keep them with something today, what you tell them?
So I think when a lot of people talk to me, they want to listen to what I have to say and think of it on how they can put it in a profit making context. Like, why is this guy worth listening to? Because how's it going to help me make more money or make more profit or get to my goals faster? And that's a lens you can use, certainly. And some of the most famous companies in the world use my work for their teams. Fair enough. But as for final ideas, I just want to share that everybody that we work with, that we know, that we live around, wants to be connected to other people. And it doesn't need to be motivated by profit to invest in creating those relationships, which at the end of the day are what make us more resilient to handle the challenges of our lives. And so you don't need to wait to find out what the ROI is before you start investing in that. And let me just take that out of the abstract. At some level, building these relationships and these friendships comes down to math. If you only invite people to 10 events a year, a dinner or walk around the park, then at that end of that year, you're going to have a certain number of successful experiences. If you make it 12 or 24, you're going to have another level of success. I don't know any reason why everyone listening wouldn't schedule 2 times each week, 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, noon to 2 p.m., twice a week. Just mark that in your calendar as a time that you're going to spend with people you want to spend time with, doing something you like to do. Eating French fries counts. And when you know that you're going to schedule those 100 times a year and you put it in your calendar, then it's just a matter of inviting people to spend that time eating French fries. And maybe there will be many times where nobody shows up to eat French fries. Fair enough. What's important is out of those 100 days, some percentage of them others are going to show up. And I promise you, research is clear about this. The people who show up are going to enjoy that time, and it's going to be a bigger deal for them than you'll ever know. And if you start this year just scheduling those times each week, I promise you in 1 year, your life will look radically different because the friends we make our lives radically different.
What an advice, and it's spot on, because we're still in Jan, so it's good. I gonna start to do it because I need this. And again, it's not about we were talking about vulnerabilities and exposure. I'm not making this to make any agitations or anything, but again, yeah, because I am one of the people that kindly faced it, I would say, Charles. And this is very good advice. I really, really appreciate, mentioning these words of wisdoms. And I like when you said, don't always look for the ROI. Sometimes things need time to see, to get the results out of, right? So it's not like something I do today, tomorrow I will see the result.
Well,
And
Mehmet, I already know how many people you want to meet this year that are going to spend time with you simply because they calculated what they're going to get out of you if they spend time with you. I already know how many of them you want to meet this year. How many? You have a rough number?
Not much.
Not much. Somewhere around 0?
No, not yeah, maybe one or two. Maybe one or two. Maybe one or
1 or
two.
2 out of 12 months. Right.
Yes.
How many people would you love to spend time with this year that would like to have a friend? And if you need to borrow something in the middle of the night and you know they have it, they want the call
As much as I can.
as much as you can. Which is a really great example on how much other people want us to show up calculating the ROI.
What an example. Nice. That's really nice. You know,
Yeah. I'll leave you with this, Mehmet. Maybe this is the advice I should have said earlier. You asked me what I want to leave. We are all living in a terribly lonely time, and I wish it were different. I wish my work was less relevant. Let's put it that way. But here's what I've come to believe. And those of us who have traveled have experienced this at some level. I've discovered that I'm surrounded by people who want to be generous and want to make a difference. When I'm in the grocery store, I'm surrounded by people who want to be helpful. And very often they just don't know how. And they don't know that they have an invitation to do that. And when we start understanding that everywhere we go, there are people there that want to be generous with us, all of a sudden the opportunities to create those friendships, invite people to have the experience that could develop into a conversation, that could develop into a friendship, that could develop into an important resource when we need help, all of a sudden that starts looking differently. And that's my actual life. I'm surrounded by people who want me to be strong, healthy, and resilient.
That's absolutely, like very touching, I would say, Charles. And I wish, and this is one of the things, that motivates me. So when I speak with someone like you, Charles, and I manage to and get the chance to speak with them on the podcast, and knowing that this is, as they call it, an evergreen content, so people can go later and find it and listen to it. And if I can touch someone even without knowing them, this is a big blessing for me. And this is why I love to do this. And people ask me like, why you kept doing this for 1 year, and you were like showing every day. And I said, yeah, because when I have guests like you, Charles, today, and even after a couple of months from now, they can't say, hey, we listened to this episode, and you know what, we we heard some words which touched us and changed our life. For me, it's, I didn't finish my mission, but it's a big part of keeping for people something to to get inspired by. So,
Yeah.
and by saying this, Charles, I really, really enjoyed the conversation with you today. I know, like, it's not like any other, episode on the show. We didn't discuss much tech, and I did this on purpose. I do from time to time this on purpose because we need a break, I would say, to go back to the basics that you mentioned, so we can have, our lives on track for success, whether it's in business, on personal, family, friends, and so on. So thank you very much, George, for your time today. I know your website is where people can go find about the books, right?
Yeah, and
Correct.
then we have blogs there which are shorter than the books, and we have free downloads. And then I recorded a podcast with wise people that I wanted to learn from, and that's all free on the website.
Cool.
So yeah, just my name is Charles Vogl, VOGL. You just search it on the internet and you should find it. It's free.
Yeah, sure. I will make people's lives easy by putting that in the show notes so they can find it easily. Again, thank you very much, Charles, for the time today and for staying a little bit late in this time for recording this episode to me. And this is usually how I end my episodes. So this is for the audience. If you are first time here and you just discovered this episode and this podcast, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed. I appreciate if you can subscribe and share this podcast with your friends and your colleagues. If you are one of the loyal fans that always keep sending me their notes and their messages, thank you very much for also keep listening to the podcast and keep your feedbacks and comments coming. I really appreciate that. And if you have an inspiring story, that you can change something by just coming here and say what you want to say, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I would be more than happy, whatever your background is, wherever you are in the world. As I used to say always, geographies are not boundaries for me. I can arrange any time zone, and you can come to this podcast. It's like an open arena for everyone who has an inspiring story, an inspiring idea that you want to share about. I would be waiting for you. Thank you very much, and we'll meet again in the next episode. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.